Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Walker. I'm the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, and we are delighted this afternoon to be hosting this special Infrastructure Intelligence roundtable with the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, ACE, also supported by our strategic partner, BECG, which has been organised to discuss the launch of what I think is a really exciting new campaign that ACE has set up and indeed launched this very day, called Consultancy 4.0. And we subtitled this event, Delivering Consultancy in a Changing World. And the whole premise of the Consultancy 4.0 campaign is a campaign that ACE wants to be client-facing to showcase the changing offering from consultancies that work in the built and natural environment, and to support that that whole premise of a different approach, or maybe an approach that clients aren't necessarily aware that consultancies can deliver, has been a whole raft of work based around data, expert insights, analysis, but particularly zoning in on the new Consultancy 4.0 website, which I would encourage everyone attending today's event to actually visit. And we'll put the link up in the chat shortly, because it's a really interesting website that contains within it a number of case studies that really highlight how the offer from consultancy firms is actually changing, and that they have so much to offer to clients beyond, if you like, just basic design and what might have been seen in the past as sort of routine consultancy work, although there's nothing routine about the fantastic work that's done by engineers and consultants in our sector. So we've got a good panel for our audience today to discuss both the campaign and the changing role of consultancies. We've got Hannah Vickers, the Chief Executive of ACE. We've got Paul Tremble, who, as well as being the Chief Strategy Officer of WSP, is also the Chair of ACE's Future Markets Group, who've done so much to mastermind this new campaign as well. We're pleased to welcome Peter Reekie, Chief Executive of the Scottish Futures Trust, and also Emma Jane Houghton, who's the Commercial Director of the UK's new hospital programme. Both people who I know have interesting and quite insightful views on the consultancy sector and how they feel it should be working and how clients should be working with it. If we have any questions from the floor on anything that's actually said, then please just paste them into the chat, and we'll do our very best to get to them in the round about an hour or so that we have available for this roundtable. Without further ado, though, to kick us off, I want to welcome Hannah Vickers, who's the Chief Executive of ACE, to say a few words about the campaign and the thinking behind it. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy, as always. So, no, really pleased to be here today. This is something which has been 3 years in the making, really. So it started with the genesis of our Future of Consultancy work, which was really about having that conversation amongst the consultants. So we knew that we had, we were being disrupted in terms of not just what we could offer to clients, but the demands that clients were asking of us around net zero and the like. So what we've been focusing on really for the last 3 years within ACE is how do we have that conversation amongst the consultants to be able to present what we think is our very best offer to clients. So it's taken us 3 years of working together to try to standardize what we think that offer is to the clients, but also think through some of the ways in which we would need to ask clients to buy from us in a different way. So how they actually buy things from us in a sort of, commercial arrangements that are shifting. So during that 3-year period, we've done a lot of thinking. In parallel, there's been quite a lot of change in government policy and in clients' appetite. So things like the construction playbook have really helped pave the way for us to be able to bring things to the table that perhaps we had no mechanism to sell to clients before. So all of that has sort of now manifested itself in, I think, this being exactly the right time for us to sort of turn our attentions to be able to have a more mature conversation with the clients around actually what we could and should be bringing to the table, and how that has moved on quite significantly over the last 3 years. So that's the purpose of this Consultancy 4.0 campaign. It's about us starting that sector level conversation with the clients on what is our new offer. And whilst we see pockets of excellence, and we are seeing, because we're developing these new service lines, we're evolving our existing service lines, we're seeing pockets of excellence with the clients, but there is definitely a lot we can be doing to better help the clients learn how they could be engaging us in a way that adds a lot more value than perhaps they have done previously, because we've got new things now to be able to bring to bear. So the premise of this Consultancy 4.0 campaign is to accelerate the uptake of this and have this single conversation with the clients around really a step change in what consultancy is and how you come to market for it. So Paul's going to speak in a minute around the sort of technical side of that. So he's going to speak a bit around what is it that's been disrupting our markets, how we've adapted what we sell to meet that, and we think give a stronger, more future focused client offer. And then alongside that, some of the enablers around the the commercials actually that we would need to sort of put in place in order to be able to deliver in this way. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but needless to say, Paul is going to be covering that. And this is the launch today. Today is the start of this campaign. What we've put out into the public domain is our sort of high level narrative around what we think we are going to be able to offer, or what we know we can offer, because we do it for some clients, but not all, shall we say. So we've got our narrative there around what it is that we can bring to the table, supported by a library of, shall we say, standardized case studies. So I'm very proud that this is not a marketing plug, so to speak. It is very collaborative. We have consistency across different sectors. We have different sizes of consultants featured in this, actually giving real examples of what they've delivered that is cutting edge and leading the market. So we have all of that now available as this sort of first step, and then going forward we build out from there. So this is a campaign we will be looking to develop out the library of case studies, but also focus on more detailed guidance and events for clients, because this is about us developing our capability, but it's also about us helping bring the clients, if you like, sort of client CPD up to speed with what is it that we are able to sell compared to perhaps what they are used to buying from us. And where's that right, where's that not useful? That's the conversation that we really are kicking off today with this launch of the campaign. And this is something, as I said, Paul will be leading for us, because many of you will know that I am departing ACE, but this is, I think, my departing gift to the consultants, because we've done the hard work as a collective. Actually, now we need to come out and start talking to the rest of the world and to our clients about it. So I'm very excited we've been able to get this off the ground and get this out into the market today. So Paul, would you like to share a few thoughts on the detail of what it actually looks like?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. As Hannah says, the Consultancy 4.0 campaign is intended to showcase the consultancy sector's response to the fourth industrial revolution and all the drivers for change that are happening around us. So it outlines how the sector is now able to offer a wide array of new services built on data, digital technology, expert insight, and analysis across the whole life cycle of an asset. I think the campaign itself is really there also to highlight best practice that's been provided across industry. And it's important to know it's not just from the large consultancies, it's also the SMEs and the micro businesses that play an important role in everything we do. So the campaign's intent is really to raise the awareness of the art of the possible across the entire client base, and to demonstrate how much consultancy have changed compared to 5 or 10 years ago and what we're now offering. The website itself is set up as a dedicated platform to shine a light on all of these efforts and really to showcase the excellence and the wide experience of the sector. The site's going to feature a number of innovative, interactive and visual case studies from ACE members, as Hannah said, and it will highlight their expertise and builds on the previous released research, webinars and articles that come from the ACE's Future of Consultancy work that Hannah has again already mentioned. From a structural perspective, there's 3 main sections to the website. One looks at the drivers for change and why doing what we've collectively or what we collectively did 5 years ago is no longer good enough on our projects. Second section looks at opportunities for providing advice and insight across the whole life cycle of an asset and highlights 4 new focus areas where we've standardized 12 consultancy services. And finally, there's a section that looks at how to make the most of partnerships and the reward models you might need to deploy to maximize value. At the moment, there's 27 case studies on there, and that really demonstrates where firms have already adapted to this changing world and are successfully delivering services in a different way, achieving greater value and outcomes for clients and society alike. We've tried to structure it in a way that's appealing to multiple audiences. So it's both for chief executives and program directors who may be simply looking to understand key principles, but it's also for procurement teams and project managers who may be looking for more detail on various subjects. The site by its very nature is going to continually evolve, and we're hoping to develop it month on month. And ultimately, we hope it will become recognized as a source of industry best practice when clients are looking to procure differently from their traditional approach. As Hannah's mentioned, we're at the start of this journey, so we're going to be developing a multi-stranded marketing campaign to make sure everyone's aware of all the great work that's happening across industry and the contribution we're making to society. We've got some brilliant people, huge amounts of energy in the industry, but we're not always great at talking about all the great work we're doing and how we're actually driving the UK economy. So there's a real opportunity over the next decade to raise the profile and reputation of all those people and firms who are working in the built environment. And we hope this campaign and the associated website will really play its part in realizing that opportunity. Again, we're looking to engage with clients nationwide over the next 6 to 12 months to make sure as many people as possible are fully up to speed as to what's available, what the latest service offering is, and what best practice looks like. So I hope in time, the site will become a really trusted channel to help members promote their latest services to clients and people who are wishing to collaborate, but also to act as a catalyst for knowledge sharing to help accelerate the transformation and the adoption of new services and new ways of working across the industry. As I've already mentioned, see the campaign being relevant to both public sector clients and private sector clients alike, and all types of consultancies, from the largest to our SMEs and micro businesses whose success is vitally important to the levelling up agenda. So I'd encourage everybody on the webinar to have a look at the website, let us have some feedback. We intend to evolve it, but it'd be great to know if you think there's any additional content you think would be useful in the first instance. Andy, back to you.
Thanks very much, Paul, for those introductory remarks. And just before I bring in Emma, Jane and Peter, just to remind people of the website address, which we put it in the chat anyway, but it's acenet.co.uk/consultancy-40, but the link is in the chat. And I can echo what both Hannah and Paul have said about the wide range of material on that website. There's a lot of good stuff on it, a lot of best practice, and I'm sure that ACE would welcome even more examples of industry best practice. And I think there's contact details on the website for people to reach out to ACE to to highlight the specific elements of innovation and different type of working that's actually leading to good results where firms are actually doing that in partnership with clients at the moment. So do get in touch with ACE, because I'm sure they will, want to actually include as much best practice on the site as possible. I just want to start off with just for Emma Jane's to get her insights on this whole area. There's a lot of change going on in the industry at the moment. Obviously, ACE and consultants are saying here, well, look, we have changed. Our offering is different. We can actually, play a key role in helping you achieve your aims going forward in a changing world. What's your thoughts on that, on this campaign, and how you think, the consultancy sector should be, I suppose, positioning itself with clients and client organisations going forward? Emma Jane.
Okay, Andy, thank you. Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is that this is a fantastic campaign, and I'm really pleased to see the launch of the campaign that followed all of the great work that Hannah highlighted with the future of consultancy, within which this obviously has its roots. So really happy to see that this campaign has been launched, and there's a lot of weight and support and energy and momentum around it. From a client perspective, it'll be no surprise to the panel today, and I hope to the majority of participants, that as a client that really values a value-led procurement, the types of offers that sit within Consultancy 4.0 are exactly what we as a value-buying clients want to see. We don't want to buy transactional people doing a transactional input-based job. We want really good quality data-driven responses. We want the strategic input up front. We want to be in a position where we are able to share our range of challenges and the complexities within that, so that the technical experts can bring that range of response and help us work out the best ways in which to address those challenges. But I think in so much as there's a challenge for clients to buy in a different way and understand that there is this different market, I think we've got to be realistic about the maturity of how we go to market as consultants and suppliers to sell those services and to share them with clients. Because I think you started off in your little précis there of saying that we're sort of there and we're ready to go. I would disagree with that. I'd say that the ambition is there, and that there is some fantastic groundwork and foundations that have been laid, and as we say, a campaign that is ready to go. But there is also a job of work for suppliers and for consultant engineers to think about how they share that range of services and how they engage with clients like us and a whole host of different clients that have got their own needs and challenges, to educate and build confidence in that client group that there is a different way of doing things. And if I were to be slightly critical, I would also say that it's sort of not a one sweeping catch-all either, because there are still plenty of suppliers and engineering consultants that are happy to sell clients, including me, a transactional business model that gets lots of people in doing lots of sort of transactional led work. So yeah, a mix of things. I'm really happy to see that it's been launched, but there's a word of caution around getting the clients in the right space, yes, but also getting the consultant engineers in the right space that we're able to do this on a journey, is what I would say.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Emma. And I think, Hannah said herself in introducing that this is in many ways the continuance of the beginnings of a dialogue with with clients, I suppose, to actually make them aware. And we'll come on to I've got some what I hope are interesting questions about how consultants do exactly what you said there in terms of informing clients about the wider offer that they actually have, and linked to that there is a different way of doing things. Because there's one thing talking about doing things differently, it's entirely something else to actually go out and do it. And I think it'll be interesting to have a bit of a conversation around the panel about that in a minute. Before we do, I just want to bring in for some of his thoughts, Peter Reiki from the Scottish Futures Trust, who are intimately involved in infrastructure in Scotland, obviously, and also some of the strategy around that. And I know that Peter is well used to working with and dealing with all parts of the construction industry, and obviously that includes consultancies as well. So just to get some of your thoughts and insights on that experience and also on the campaign that ACE are launching today. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. I should also add that I've been one in the past as well. So speaking from both ends, if you like. And I was remembering at the start of this when Hannah said I spoke at the Future of Consultancy event. It seems like quite a long time ago now. So I'm really pleased to see this entering the next stage, if you like, of its evolution. And I agree with you all, it will be an evolution. We can't flick a switch on this, either on the client side or on the consultant side. I'm not going to repeat what I talked about a number of months ago, but I'm delighted that SFT has been involved in this sort of journey that we're all taking between us. We've got a piece of work going on around Scotland focused on social infrastructure at this stage, and we call it Transforming the Value of Consultancy. And our strapline for that is a collaborative venture to review and change the scope of services, remuneration, and approach to procurement for key roles on social infrastructure projects to enhance the value consultants can add, because we really feel that as clients, we need to help all the clients across Scotland get the most from their consultants to get the most from their asset outcomes. So very central to what we're doing in Scotland across our infrastructure sectors is to get the best from our consultants. So we want to do that collaboratively with the industry. So what I thought I'd do is just pick apart the 4 sort of new roles that Hannah and Paul have referred to, and just pick a little example out of each of those that I see as particularly important for us. So the first one you have is strategic advisory and solutions definition. And being a slightly old-fashioned soul at times, I quite often go back to the Design Council's Double Diamond framework for innovation. And the whole first diamond of that on the left is the research phase. So going wide on discovering more about the problem you've got, and then narrowing down on defining the problem that you've got to get to that element of the problem definition. It's only in the right-hand diamond that you get to broadening out on developing potential solutions and narrowing down on delivering a single solution. And for us, the value is in the left-hand side of the diagram, as my colleague Colin Proctor likes to refer to it as. So that element that many of us in our roles don't even think about, how do we understand the problem better, because we move into solution mode. So what we're very much trying to do is to get clients and advisors to think about how we can put more time, energy, and more of our budget into properly understanding the problem at the left-hand side of the diagram, before even getting to the point of understanding that a new asset or an investment in an asset is part of the solution. So again, kind of obvious, but thinking left-hand side of the diagram and how we can buy services that help us understand the problem. The next of your 4 was operational advisory. And here we're very big on, as everyone is at the minute, on asset optimization. So Scotland's infrastructure investment plan that was launched earlier this year has an investment hierarchy for the first time, which makes it very clear that making better use of what we've got is the first stage before we start thinking about whether we need anything new and what that new thing needs to be. So clients there need investigative skills to understand their older existing assets better. And you might say that's some of the brass tacks stuff, but for me, it's something that people are talking to me about all of the time at the minute. We're not finding people who can help us understand the assets that we've got and how those are put together and how we can then transform them into the assets that we need. But with that sort of, maybe you call it old-fashioned investigative skills, there's also digital skills in sort of the integration of sensor technologies into assets with AI, perhaps, to fully optimize that existing asset, and to know how it's used better, to think how we need to maintain it better, so that we can consider optimization and repurposing and sharing, really particularly sharing, before we invest in a new thing, if you like. We're pretty clear that every asset must have more than one purpose. If it's a single purpose asset, it's unlikely to be optimized and doing the best for us. The third area, solutions development and delivery. So here I'd highlight the service that you've got in there of design integration. I think clients are increasingly, or perhaps I should say on the cusp of realizing that this is critical and needs to be paid for. passive, etc., is highlighting that we can't have that old linear architect to what it looks like and how you use it, then onto the structured people to hold it up, and then onto the M&E folks to keep it warm. That's not good enough anymore. So how we integrate those services and put the umbrella over them all so that we know the whole system will work together. And yes, there are insurance issues to be resolved. Yes, there are commercials to be resolved around the ownership of the digital twin. Yes, there are issues around which party leads in all of that. These are the important things that between the consultancy and the client community we need to work out, but they're critical for me around that that sort of core solution development, design integration piece. Finally, non-construction solutions and delivery. Just a little thing for me here, joining up in relationships. Please don't think that your clients know the other clients around them better than you do. It's quite likely that you know the other clients that people could be working with or sharing their assets with at least as well as the clients themselves do. So I think there's a big sort of joining up service that consultants can bring to whole systems outside single clients. Just before I finish, I have to say this really. We talk about foundations and frontiers. Emma Jane said a lot of these ideas are still frontiers, but we can't forget about the foundations either. The core business, competency, regulation, it's all coming towards us. When you're likely to be giving evidence at the public inquiries, we have our own and hospitals in Scotland. I know Grenfell's still going in England. We do work in a safety critical industry, so designing for climate change and net zero is unforgiving of inefficiency and ineffectiveness of details of design. So we really need to up our game on those aspects and sort of challenge the over-engineered norms, if you like, as well as moving to these frontiers. I'm happy to discuss any of that in more detail.
Thanks very much, Peter, for that. I can just see that our additional panelist, Tony Slater, is joining us online at the moment as we speak from Highways England. I think he's just trying to sort out a few technical challenges at the moment, so we'll come back to Tony in a second. And I just want to kick off with one of the questions that's come through in the chat, and it's a question to Emma and Peter. And I'm going to come to Emma first, and that is, what do you think we need to do differently to accelerate this change, and particularly the change to get most from consultants, and particularly around value as well? What do you think we need to do specifically on that to make that change come more quickly? And I'll start off with Emma and then I'll come to Peter.
I think I'd start with setting out the scale of the opportunity, because it is an opportunity. If we think about public sector clients at the minute, of which we are one, and there are many others with a big infrastructure and built environment pipeline, you know, they're sort of looking at a market which is constrained. They're looking at construction playbook and other big initiatives that move us towards collaborating earlier with suppliers and in a way that delivers value and broader socioeconomic objectives and benefits for their programs and their investments. So I think any sensible client at the moment is sat in front of that with that landscape in front of them, and they're thinking, how can I do this differently and in a way which is value for the taxpayer and in a way which makes sense for a sustainable market and good outcomes for my program? And I think what we've got to remember is that, you know, these guys are in these clients are typically not the experts in terms of how that is best done. The experts reside in the consulting engineers and the suppliers. So for me, the onus is on those suppliers to think about it from a client's perspective, to put yourself in those client shoes and to set out a range of options. Some clients will have different appetites, different abilities to maneuver in their own organizations around doing things differently. So some will want some small step change, some will want to do things in a similar way, but perhaps adding elements of innovation. Others will be bolder and will want to do things in a markedly different way. For me, the onus is on to accelerate the change. It's to think about the opportunities and where they reside, and to present those options in a compelling way that makes sense for that client and their portfolio.
Thanks for that, Emma Jane. Just before I come to Peter, get his observations, always assuming that the technology is working, which I think it appears to be. Just like to introduce Tony Slater, who's the Alliance Manager at Highways England, one of those large organisations with a significant infrastructure plans going forward that Emma just mentioned there. Just we've just had all of our panelists just give their observations on this whole issue and the whole thinking behind the Consultancy 4.0 campaign. Tony, what are your kind of opening thoughts really on this, having just heard about the campaign and how your organisation views working with the consultancy sector?
Sure, yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. I apologise for being slightly late. The joys of working on a live project or a live program. So apologies for that. So in terms of if I just answer your question slightly differently, if that's right, if I just frame it differently. So we want to get the best value from consultants, and it's what that value is. So for consultants to have a higher value with us, we want them to be a stake in the whole game. The cost of consultants within our part of infrastructure will be 10% of a scheme from very start to very end. So very small in the overall capital cost. The capital cost is largely in the product that we build. But equally, we can get more value and a lot of value from our consultants. And we want to give them the opportunity to increase that return. So the contracting strategy and the contracting structure should encourage consultants, not necessarily to reduce cost, but to increase value. And the only real way and the only real sustainable way for that is to have a stake in the overall. So consultants can see how they can influence the whole of our cost, the whole of our outcome, and where they can really truly bring additional value. Additional value in this sense is largely about reducing the overall cost, the overall spend. So if consultants can reduce that, they become far more prominent. But it's a change in business model for them. And obviously, if you want to go into gain share, which is what we would want, there's potential for risk. So there has to be an equitable way of driving the ability of consultants to earn more based on an increased value, but controlling that with a risk and controlling the risk that makes it equitable.
Thanks very much for that, Tony. We'll come back to some of those points, I'm sure, in a minute, because I think they hit to the centre of a lot of what the Consultancy 4.0 campaign is seeking to do. But I just want to flick back to Peter Reiki just to get him to answer that question that was posted in the chat earlier from Craig Humpbatch, when he said that he agreed with what you were saying about working together to get the most from consultants to meet your needs and value ambitions. But what do you think practically we need to do differently to make that change come about quicker?
I've got a couple of things on that. Firstly, and again, these will probably sound like statements of the obvious, but start different conversations with different people is my first one. And whenever we know from the list of things that we've put up here and the discussion we've been having that clients are trying to think in different ways, and clients see their problem statement as different from the problem statements they've had in the past. So most clients' problem statements at the minute include net zero quite high on the list, and they include digital quite high on the list. So if we start our conversations around understanding those aspects rather than talking about traditional engineering stuff, then we're likely to get into that in a different way. And I would suggest that for many people that at whatever level we work at, if we're having a conversation with them about those things, those are the things that their bosses and their bosses' bosses are telling them they need to do more of. So it gets you up the chain, if you like, in that way. But then I think the follow-on to that is where it gets, I guess, a bit more tricky, is if you want to sell a different set of services that allows you to add offer a different sort of value and a client's not bought it that way before, you need to be able to help them with how they can go about buying it. Because if we can't, if the client doesn't know what they want, then they're not going to be able to write a specification and say, if you do this for me, I will remunerate you as follows. So if you want to offer something, have a way that it becomes buyable.
Thanks for that, Peter. I just want to throw a couple of questions out to the panel. And in particular, I'm going to kick this one off probably with Hannah. And that is just looking at the website over the last couple of days, there's a whole raft of stuff on there that I think maybe some clients might look at it and think, well, I wasn't really aware that that was the kind of thing that consultancies can actually help us with, notwithstanding the comments that have previously been made about some clients and some consultants. And I think Emma Jane's warning was well made about them still doing things in maybe, you know, an old type of approach. How can consultancy firms actually present themselves as offering those services, and flowing from that, how can they ensure that, you know, that clients are aware of the above approach as well? Hannah.
So I think to some extent, Andy, we're a sort of a victim of our own capability here, because as engineers, we get very fixated with the process and the fancy BIM model and what we can create. And we almost fall in love with what we can create, that we don't really take a step back and go, what value is that adding to the client? So, you know, Emma Jane, you made a fair point around putting yourself in the client's shoes. Now, whilst we can do very clever, really very interesting and value-adding things, it's drawing the line between technically we can do something and what value does that add to the client. I think we often don't quite draw those parallels. And in part, it's because we're a very reactive industry. The culture of the industry is such that the client puts out an ITT, we fill out a nice form, and then, you know, we end up with a contract. We don't actually market ourselves. We've not had to do that in recent years. It is so stable that we can just basically, you know, it feels very prescribed for us. So it's quite a sort of shift in how we run our businesses, how we engage with our clients more proactively, and almost how we market ourselves. You know, I've spoken to some consultancies when I why are you not pitching that to the client? And then we're waiting for someone to give them permission. They're waiting for a client to invite them in and say, no, please do tell me what I could be buying from you, because they've just not had to approach the market in that way. So I think there's a little bit more of that, actually, however uncomfortable that might feel for us, particularly those that are, you know, dyed in the wool engineers. Maybe I think there's certainly an interesting part of sort of shifting that dialogue, because actually it's going to be new for both sides, and that takes somebody stepping out and saying, let's have a conversation about this, because we're going to need to put some collective effort into making it work. I mean, you know, when we come into the commercial models, I'm sure we'll come back to this, but there's a big step between wanting something to work and actually having the mechanism to make it work that everybody will buy into from an equitable, trusting, risk perspective. So I think, you know, we'll probably come back to that, but certainly that the concept of proactively going out and promoting and selling and even engaging with a client on the basis of, you know, this is something that we think we can offer because it's going to add a lot of value to you, is just not how we have previously operated. So we need a campaign like this to sort of maybe nudge and help the consultants to do that.
Thanks, Hannah. So are consultancies doing enough to promote that wider range of skills that they do offer? I mean, what's your experience of that? And if I can turn to Tony first to maybe give his thoughts on that, then I'll come back to Emma Jane as well to find out what she thinks. Tony, are they doing enough in your experience? You just need to unmute.
Apologies. I think the question mark around are consultancies doing enough to sell their services? Probably not. But the point about consultancies answer the question is really valid. So at point of contract award, we're all focused, and consultancies are focused on answering the question to get through. So you get what you ask for as a client. So if we ask for something, we will get that back in spades. So therefore, it's confused messaging, and it's confused at the point of tender inquiry. So, but on top of that, no, I don't think consultancies are doing enough. I mean, I know that my experience is that there's a far deeper knowledge base within consultancies than is being showcased and is being offered. And when we go into pull that, so when I go into pull on and ask for things, I know that there is a deeper capability there, but it doesn't necessarily get showcased in that way. I think the point also is around, well, what's important to us as an infrastructure client, and it isn't just about low cost. You know, we need to be looking at a lot the far more rounded outcomes. That to me is where we want to see consultancies pushing us even harder. So net zero, no net loss, being cost efficient for the taxpayer, leaving a positive legacy. All these things are equally important, but do not necessarily get brought to the surface on the initial shop window, if you like.
Thanks for that, Tony. It's interesting you mentioned there about you know, sort of a tender and pre-tender phase that basically you get what you ask for, and maybe there's something there about you're working in a different way, really, and actually in a different way that does tease out, you know, some of these maybe hitherto hidden pieces of expertise, because people are just focused on replying to you know, the tender. I mean, I know Emma Jane, you've spoken at length and with some eloquence in the past around having a different approach to all of that. I mean, is there something in that about how we need to look at the way the industry works together and maybe change some of the commercial arrangements that we have, or even the way that we contract? What's your view on that?
I think most definitely there's a lot of work to be done there, but I think, you know, there's a clear step before how we buy in terms of what we buy, and I don't want us to lose sight of the, you know, the real magic in making Consultancy 4.0 work is in getting to grips with the what we buy, and definitely, yes, the how we buy is then the enabler. I wanted to pick up on something that Hannah sort of finished on before we moved on, and that was about, you know, the language has started to turn into, for consultant engineers to then promote, and it started to feel like a sort of very subjective selling world of PR, and I'm sure that's not what we meant, but that's how I felt where it was going. Whereas actually, I think, you know, the way in which I think the consultancy should approach this is in a very sort of objective business case way, business model way. So if we pull something compelling together that says, as a client, I know you're in this position, this is the landscape as it exists in front of you, these are your challenges, here's how you would typically buy us in terms of the scope, but here are some other objective options, and here are the merits and demerits for going to market in this way for this scope, and then talk about the how it is bought with the procured value, and talk about breaking down the barriers to participation, and talk about the broader procurement and the opportunities. So yeah, I'd make a call for action around that sort of object. I would welcome that, certainly. The compelling objective business case around, if you were to buy these outcomes, or you bought this tool, or you bought this specific IPR, something like this, that you would get better outcomes in terms of what you are ultimately trying to deliver.
Thanks, Emma Jane. Paul, what's your thoughts on what Emma Jane's just said there? It seems to me to be a sensible approach, and one that hopefully clients would be receptive to, and that whole area of you know, business case approach towards assisting clients in achieving their wider aims, and we'll come on to some of those, particularly around value, a little bit later. But what's your thoughts on that?
I think Emma Jane's got it right. I think there's some very good examples of people who are able to do that, businesses who are able to do that, perhaps businesses that have the confidence to be able to do that. But I don't think it's as widespread as any of us would like. And I think, building on what Peter said earlier, I think historically we've been sort of order takers and been very transactional in our approach to working with clients. And I think going forward, we need to be much more engaged in the early stages before things come to market to try and help shape things. I think it's really important. And I think one of the things that we try and do, and we don't always get it right, is to really engage with our clients early on to try and understand their challenges, what's important to them, why is it important? And I think that whole question of why is a really good approach to take with clients. Sometimes it can be a little bit annoying, so I would have to apologize for that, but actually really trying to understand the point that Emma Jane was making about putting yourself in the client's shoes. But not all consultants, not all engineers are very good at that. It's a really different set of skills. You need to be good at sort of consultative selling. Peter mentioned you need good investigatory skills. Good listening skills is really, really important. And I think a lot of people forget how important it is to listen to what people are saying, rather than making assumptions about what they're actually saying. So no, absolutely agree with Emma Jane. And I think, again, this is about the purpose of this campaign is to try and raise, if you like, the common denominator across industry that will make us better at doing that, whether you're, as I said earlier, a small consultant or a larger consultant.
Thanks very much, Paul. Peter, did you want to come back on some of that?
I just think there's a really sort of classic good way into this, if you like, which is that every time a client organization publishes or updates its business plan or business strategy, then its next step ought to be updating its asset strategy and asset plan to go with its business plan and business strategy. And that's for me, that's the conversation stage to get in at, because once that asset strategy is turned into a project need, then you're too late. We're not on the left-hand side of the diagram anymore. So we're trying to say, how do you do it? Where do you go in? Well, I think the point that it's going in at I see you've updated your business strategy. How are you thinking about your asset strategy that backs up this? Can I help? I know, again, teaching my grandmother, but that stage is where we really want to get in to be able to add the maximum value, I think.
Thanks for that, Peter. I want to come back to Tony to pick up on something you said earlier again earlier on, and it comes back on this, what clients are asking for from consultants, because clearly, clients want to get the best out of everybody that they work with, including the consultants that they work with as well. So is there something about the approach that clients are taking in relation to engagement with those consultants at an early stage to actually make sure that they do tease out some of those issues that you maybe hinted that weren't being forthcoming? Is there something we can all do collectively together to make that more likely to happen, in your view?
Yes, I think there is. So it's about understanding where you as an organisation can add value. And I'm listening with intent around the ability of consultants to influence schemes and programs at the front end, which is a high. There's a lot consultancies can do that, obviously, but there's a lot of downstream value that consultancies can bring too, and that often gets underplayed. And underplaying that at your peril is where I am, because as we move into a digital age, design and the presentation of design will be more and more digitally generated. It will require less people, less turning the handle people, but will require a high degree of intelligence. And that's where I think consultancies can really showcase and add true value. It's bringing in that additional intelligence that we've got upstream of program development and downstream as we start to move into construction or into on-site assembly. We do need that input. And it's knowing how we can tease out that intelligence from consultancies that gives us the ability to turn something from what's good today to what you're aspiring for, which is something transformational. I think clients could do to understand a lot of that. It's something that in Howes England we're doing, but it's something that perhaps could do to be shared a lot more openly and a lot more widely. And I would again go back to my point around, it isn't just on cost, it isn't just an output. There are other factors, whether it's carbon, whether it's biodiversity, no net loss, delighting the customers that we end up serving, whatever it is, whatever metrics we put on, those are equally important to the overall efficiency.
Thanks, Tony. And I think just to say as well to the clients that are in the audience, and I know there's quite a number, and obviously on this platform as well, that there's a real opportunity here as well for you to engage with the Consultancy 4.0 campaign, to influence it, to do some of the things that you just spoke about there, Tony, from the point of view of helping ACE and helping the consultancy sector to tease out, some of those issues. Because at the end of the day, as we all know, this industry of ours is very much a collective, collaborative industry that's built on teamwork, and therefore, we obviously need all of the parties to, that make up the wider industry to actually, I think, help each other on this as well. I just want to turn, to Hannah. You spoke about something earlier about some of the commercial, sort of frameworks in play in the industry at the moment. I know this is something that previous to this campaign, the Future of Consultancy initiative that you very much spearheaded, and now the 4.0 campaign has actually been looking at. Do you want to just reflect on some of those and maybe, sort of just to highlight how you would like to see those develop as we move forward?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. So, I mean, I think we can easily get fixated on the commercials, but, to Emma Jane's point earlier, we do need to know what it is. And I have identified the right what to the right client. So let's assume we've done that, because, we can switch the commercials, but actually if you're just buying the same thing in a different way, it's not really going to change the end outcomes. So assuming that we've gone through the phase we've just talked about, where we've identified together the best possible thing in terms of value add, and we're now going to move to the commercials around that, there is a really big piece in shifting, and I think actually rewarding value creation. Now, it's interesting, if you look on paper at the moment, we actually have, I think, very little, or we give very little visibility to the clients in terms of the solutions we provide and the overall value that they add. It won't be until that has started to be constructed or even started to be operated that actually the client has much visibility on whether the benefits they had anticipated with that particular intervention were going to be realized. Now, at the moment, as far as our commercials are concerned, we get paid whatever. Now, clearly there is client sentiment, there is a level of understanding and reflecting on the performance of your supply chain, but the commercials are very much, you get paid whether it is fantastically value adding or whether it is good enough and safe enough to have passed the bar. And I think that's really what we need to shift here, because shifting that dynamic will, yes, it will change the contracts, yes, it will change the risk balance, but fundamentally it will change how the consultants recruit, how they train people, how they deploy those people, and how they structure their businesses. So it starts to shift the entire business model of the consultants, because you move away from utilization onto value add per individual. Those people have more rewarding jobs because they aren't going to be booked to projects in order to make the revenue targets. They're going to be seen as individuals and thought of around how does their skill set add a particular value add to a client. So I think it's really internally massively transformational if we can shift that. And it's not just about the commercial shift whereby saying you have to pay the consultants for this financially. There are softer measures that we can bring in around incentivization that look at repeat business. And in some ways, I'm really interested to see how this, as we start to get a clearer definition of what, and are able to have conversations with clients about meeting their needs with a different what, I do wonder whether it might scale faster in the private sector, because they already have that mindset of quick turnaround. They can select their supply chain based on the performance. And as soon as they start to get better visibility and better data around how a consultant is performing, I can see this potentially really starting to accelerate and shift the business models more quickly of the consultants that work in the private sector.
Thanks for that, Hannah. Really interesting question in the chat box from Leslie Ward from Atkins, I think she's from. And she said, and it sort of flows from this whole area about value and showing value. Do the panel agree that the labour-based model of pricing value is no longer appropriate for a lot of what we do? So how do we help clients de-link value from input efforts? And I'm going to ask that question first to Paul Tremble, your thoughts on that, and then I'm going to turn to Emma Jane on that. So Paul, your thoughts on that, de-linking value from input effort. How do we help clients with that concept?
was hoping you weren't going to fire that at me first, Andy, because that's a really tricky question, but let me have a go at it. I mean, I think first and foremost, this whole business model incentivization is a really complex subject, and it touches on a whole host of things that are very sort of difficult to separate. So I think when we talk about incentivization or labor-based models not being quite right, I think we've sort of got to be careful on what we wish for, because I think as Emma Jane said at the start, I'm not sure all of the industry or a lot of the industry is quite ready for that, and it's a journey, and I think we need to sort of start moving on that, but do it in a way that works with the industry that we currently have and the way things work. So I'm a strong believer that we should look at more incentivization, but I think we've got to keep it relatively simple at the beginning so people can understand it. That'll sort of get better and better as we understand what value's about. So I think in a simple way, I don't think we're quite at the point yet to say that labor-based models, when you take everything into the picture, are inappropriate for a lot of what we do, because actually moving to a different place is quite complex and quite difficult, and I think both clients and consultants will struggle with it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have an ambition, doesn't mean we shouldn't plant something on the horizon to shoot for, but I think we just got to take it a step at a time.
Thanks, Paul. Emma Jane, your thoughts on that whole value aspect, which seems to me, looking at the Consultancy 4.0 website and frankly, the massive panoply of expertise and input that can be provided by consultants. How do we get that across in a better way? And is it the case that we need to rethink the way in which we actually work with each other in that sense?
Yeah, well, look, I've sympathy with what Paul says, and it's a very pragmatic response, because doing this, decoupling it in the way that I've forgotten the question's name, sorry, but in the way that the question was asked is a really difficult part of unpicking this jigsaw and moving the debate on. But I think for me, that caution that we're exercising, that we hear from Paul, is part of the problem of why this won't move on at the acceleration pace that we're really looking for. And I think in the way that we've talked about these things before, we need to be a lot bolder and a lot braver on both sides, both from a supply side and the client side, to really accelerate in the way that we all want to see. And for me, the original question about how we do decouple it, I think we should start measuring now what the value is of those input-based models objectively, so that we are able to say that if we buy in this input-based way that we're also comfy with because it's what we do, that's fine, but it equates to value of X versus the potential value of Y if we were to do it in all the ways that Hannah described that are outlined so brilliantly in Consultancy 4.0. So I think for me, the way that we decouple it is to put the onus on ourselves now to start measuring the value that is derived from those input-based models, and breaking that comfort blanket of I've got a person on a seat and they're doing that job and I'm familiar with that, so that's fine. Because until we do that, it's very opaque in terms of the business model that we run with and why we're doing it.
Thanks, Emma Jane. Tony, your thoughts on building on that, really?
I think it's essential that we delink value and the labour-based input model. So I think there's a way, it's how we go about that. So the businesses on the calls, and all consultancies rely on people to earn their revenue, and we mustn't lose sight of that. But in terms of reward, the reward should be external and separate from that labour input, and it should be from the value generated. And I can't see why that type of model isn't ready to go now, and actually it is ready to go now. And like I said before, we should be bringing in additional value from the consultancy market to infrastructure schemes where they can add true value. The way to do that is to link consultancies into the overall performance and the end performance of those major infrastructure programs, because that's where they can truly change. They can truly change the outcome. but it does delink the labour input to the value. That's not to say that you can't delink all payments. You have to pay consultancies for the time that they do, but to get the extra bit, to get the reward that you really want, you're going to have to be part of the overall venture and take some share in that. Those models are there and ready. It does change the outlook. It requires consultancies to change. It requires clients to change. But that's exactly what I think we should be doing, and exactly where we should be moving now. And I can't see any barriers to that, other than overcoming it from an organisational perspective.
So I think what I'm hearing there is really, it's more about the client-consultant relationship, which is key to making all of this work, really, because if you're having those conversations from the outset and you're actually demonstrating that wider value piece, then I think it seems to me that there is a much greater chance of getting to where we want to be as a final destination. I don't know what you think about that, Peter. I know looking at the wider value piece in particular, I know looking at the Scottish infrastructure strategy that I know the Scottish Futures Trust was intimately involved in, value is absolutely front and centre of a lot of the key priorities in that particular plan. So obviously further down the line, that's got to have a reflection in the way that clients are working with their consultants, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think as clients, we've all talked about value and we've all talked about outcomes. That's the language that we are all using about everything that we do. The sort of counterfactual to that Paul brought up is that you immediately move into that commercial territory of too many variables, lots of different parties, etc. And what am I prepared to put myself at risk for on the sell side, if you like? So I understand all of that. I think that there are some things that we can do now, and some of it is about a pathway that different people will get happier with different risk allocations over time and different value allocations over time. So that'll be both on the buy side and the sell side. People will take different approaches to that. Some people might be more comfortable, for example, just moving to a longer term appointment for life cycle, where you can share some life cycle value, retainer models, all of those sort of semi-traditional approaches, if you like, over longer terms. And some people might be prepared to look at materials inputs, for example, and look at whether we can optimize design further than we would normally have done, or are we regulatorily required to do for materials input, and start to incentivize around that. So you can see tracks of incentivization pathways in different areas, or as Jane Antonio said, there will be solutions that we can say, here's a shared outcome. We, as a client, understand the value of that outcome. And I think you might be right, Andy, that it's easier to value that outcome monetarily often as a private sector client than it is as a public sector client. And then we can share the rewards around maximizing that value. But so some things it's a leap, some things it's a path, and looking for things that we can do differently.
Thanks very much, Peter. Just turn to Hannah to maybe just to reflect on the opportunities that there are out there, both for consultancies and clients, around this Consultancy 4.0 campaign to get involved and to engage. Hannah, did you get that question?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit, Andy.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just say that again, if you can just sort of highlight as we move towards the close, some of the opportunities, the real opportunities that are there within this campaign for both clients and consultancies to engage with it and to help take, forward its aims. Okay.
So, so from the client side, I think this is about the consultants raising the flag, say, look, we want to start this, we want to start to bring this to life. So, certainly from the client side, I would use this campaign actually to have that early conversation about what you could be buying, and understanding that, and making sure that you are, through this campaign and through the ACE and the network that exists within the ACE, are fully cognizant of what is on the table, and giving the consultants the opportunity to really understand what value means to you, and therefore, what they can currently do to deliver on that, which may be quite different to what they could have done 5 years ago. So I think that's the first thing, is I think that this is now, the consultants throwing open the door to say, come and have a collective conversation with us, and we will make the effort. And we've started to showcase it on the website with the case studies. But I think it's actually, how then do we almost tailor that if we get a particular client coming forward during market sounding to say, look, let's just make sure you are fully appraised of what we could be doing for you as a collective. So I think that's the sort of the first piece from the client side. As far as the consultants are concerned, I think there is a piece in here about really looking at and reflecting hard on the appetite to move to some of these things. Now, it's hard, but it's not binary. I think, from the discussion we've had to date, you could assume that it is, you go from an hours-based model into a fully outcome-based model, and that, those are the only two, whereas actually there's a lot more of a sort of, grey area in the middle that we could start to move towards. So I think, there's sort of being a bit bolder in that space, and using, where you've got the opportunity, where you're in early with clients, or whether you're working, at client side in advisory, actually really trying to think through, as a business, what would we stand behind? Even if it was just for a pilot, what is it commercially that we would be comfortable with, insofar as, taking risk and having some of our fee put at risk? Is there something which is let's do an input-based model, but speaking to Emma Jane's point earlier, why aren't we measuring the impact that we have as consultants? Even if we don't yet put that into the commercial arrangements, why aren't we doing that ourselves, so that at least we can start to think about, when are we going to be ready to be bold enough to say to a client, actually, absolutely, we're going to bid on that. Yes, it's outcome-based, and yes, we might get no money and do a lot of work for you, but we know, because we have measured the value that we create, that we are willing to take that risk, because it's really important. So I think that's the piece, really. So for clients, let's start that conversation about what it is that the market can now offer. And I think, make sure we're doing that early enough to have some influence in that space. And then for the consultants, if you get a client biting on that, you've really got to be ready to stand behind the commercials of that value-based offer. So how ready are you, and what are you doing to understand that he's not measuring timesheets, and thinking about your business model and your value add in a different way? So I think those are the two takeaways I would suggest, Andy, and we can use the campaign as a vehicle for both of those conversations.
Thanks, Anna. Just a lot of talk here as well, permeating throughout the whole discussion about outcome based, looking at outcomes, and I want to ask Paul very much an outcome based question, and that is, how will you know if this campaign has been a success further down the track in terms of your group's work within ACE? What does success look like for this campaign to you?
Okay, I think there's probably a couple of immediate success factors. I think first and foremost, it is, what degree of engagement do we get through the campaign, through the website, engagement with clients wanting to talk about this, people from industry wanting to contribute. And so there's if you like, almost the internal element of measurement. How invested are people in making this happen? So I think that's the first point. I think the second point is probably a longer term measurement, which is taking Jane's point in a different way. If we were to measure the uptake of value-based procurement now and then to measure it at a later date, have we actually seen some improvement? Have we, as the ACE, contributed to an acceleration of uptake on this type of work? And so I think there's an internal bit. Is industry engaged in it? Are they invested in it? And are we actually making progress on that front? And then, are we seeing clients do what we've talked about today? And are they changing their systems, processes, and way of doing things? And there'll be some early adopters and some great examples like the hospitals program, Highways England. But actually, what we're trying to do is to move the bar across the whole industry, so that we can actually develop a greater reputation and sort of value for society. So I think they're the two areas.
Thanks very much, Paul. Very briefly to conclude to our three remaining panelists, I'm going to kick off with Peter and then Tony, and then I'm going to finish with Emma Jane. So Peter, just how can, sort of flowing from what Paul was saying, how can organisations like yours, how can those in the wider industry sector work together to help realise some of these aims as exemplified in the 4.0 campaign?
Well, I sort of going out where I came in, a lot of this is about connections and relationships, because whilst we're talking about a very big group of people here and largely engineering consultants, there's a whole lot more people on the park, and you've got some here today, the clients, but you've also got a bunch of contractors out there who often take leading roles, and you've also got architects and you've got surveyors, and so I think that the role of organizations like mine, and indeed like ACE, is to build the connections and the webs around the different players on the park to get everyone having different conversations with different people. And it's those new conversations with those new groups of people that will change us in the way that we do the business. So that's what I'm looking to be part of over time. So that's why I'm so pleased to be here today.
Thanks very much, Peter. Tony, just your reflections on that. How can we all work together to realise all of this?
I think in a number of ways. I think it's for clients to understand what outcomes they truly want and to communicate those clearly. So it's obvious, so it's less opaque and more transparent. Consultants understand where they can add value. So what are the things that they can do differently and where they can add? So it's a push and pull. So clients need to push and consultants need to pull. So from both sides, we can start to see how each organization and how each group can impact and support each other. And I think within that, there's an element of honesty. And the honesty is from the client side is to be honest enough to share a model that consultants need and would need to operate, and to recognise that there's a journey to go on in terms of change, and from consultancies to be really honest about where they can add value, and not to sell something that they can't necessarily go and deliver, because that will just lead to a further mistrust and a breakdown of where you're trying to get to. So those are the few things that I'd just kind of leave with, and to try and be really clear, about what you can offer and what you're asking for.
Thanks for that, Tony. Honesty, collaboration, clarity. Emma Jane, your thoughts just to sort of wrap us up on how organisations like yours and the wider industry can engage with this important campaign.
I think by recognising that how we do this, whether we do it in a different way or we continue to do it in the existing way, is a choice, and it is a choice that we can make, and one that we make deliberately. So I think we should recognise that it's not about, oh, this is the sort of way of doing it and it's a choice if we start to do it differently. They are all choices that we deliberately make, whether that be to continue with the input-based model or the new value model that we've seen advocated so well today.
Thanks very much for that, Emma, and thanks very much indeed to all of our panellists on this roundtable, kicking off the launch of the Consultancy 4.0 campaign, to Paul Tremble from WSP, from Peter Reiki, the Scottish Futures Trust, and also Tony Slater from Highways England, as well, of course, Emma Jane from the UK New Hospital Programme, and indeed to Hannah Vickers, the Chief Executive of ACE, who is actually moving into a different part of the consultancy sector. So all the best with the challenges that you will face there in your new role, Hannah, and thank you very much indeed for all of your insights and assistance during your time at ACE. And just to conclude, really, from me, it's clear that we have an opportunity here to actually do things differently. And as Emma says, it's a choice. As Emma Jane said, it's a choice. It's always a choice to do things differently. But I think we've heard that consultancies need to work differently. The opportunities there for that. Clients as well need to take a different approach in order to ensure that they can facilitate that different approach from consultants. But also the industry needs to change as well. We know that. You know, that's why we have some of the excellent work being done by the Construction Leadership Council, the Construction Innovation Hub, all the work that's been done around value as well. And I hope and I expect that this campaign, the Consultancy 4.0 campaign, will contribute to all of that to ensure that we end up not just with a better industry and not just with better relationships, but also with better projects and outcomes that do change the lives of the citizens of the country, really, for the better, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. That's why we come to work in this industry, this brilliant industry, every day. So again, thanks to all of our panelists today for what I think has been a very illuminating and insightful conversation. And I'm sure that conversation will continue on the Consultancy 4.0 website in the weeks, months ahead. So thanks again for everybody for taking part. Thanks for everyone for logging on. Thanks to our strategic partners, BECG, for their support of all of the infrastructure intelligence live events this year. And it just remains for me, Andy Walker, to say thanks a lot. And we'll see you again soon on Zoom. But hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll all be able to meet in person as well as we slowly but surely emerge from this pandemic situation. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Rob.